This morning I had a chat with a mother, a homeschooling mother, planning to enroll some children in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, and we had a good talk about the relationship that should exist between parents and a tutor. And when I say tutor here, I mean it in the sense of a classical schoolmaster. And in our unique circumstance today, because of the internet and how we can communicate, the relationship between myself and homeschooling parents and how that relationship needs to be arranged so as to benefit the children. And as I was talking to this mother, we had a good conversation, and I realized that I was touching on some things that I've never really spent much time explaining, and I thought it would be a good idea to give it a little more attention and to explain it a little bit more, because I think that this is one of the things that, a general issue that homeschooling parents are really stuck on. I don't think homeschool programs address it because they don't care, because they're selling books and they'll just continue to multiply paid services forever. And so, parents who feel overwhelmed, it's actually kind of like a target audience. The more overwhelmed a parent is, the more they'll pay. But I want to try to solve this problem rather than exploit it. So the problem is that, well, let's not call it a problem. Let's say the situation that we face, it's not to be looked at negatively, it's just necessary. The problem is that as parents, we have an idea of the education that our children need, or we have some vague idea of the education our children should have. And if parents would just put the catalogs down, stop looking at what's available, and just think about what's necessary, we would come to a conclusion where we'd say, we want our children to be educated in the way that the doctors of the church or the saints would tell us to educate our children. We want our children to be educated in the way that doctors of the church, like St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, would tell us to educate our children. That's what we want. And we should write that on the whiteboard, as it were, as the goal of our homeschooling, to provide our children with the education that the doctors of the church would tell us to give our children. And then what we should do as parents is we should seek how to make that a reality, how to achieve that goal. And that's why I say put the catalogs away, because that's the wrong mindset. The catalog mindset is to look at what's available and pick from among what's available. And that's the wrong way to do it. I'd like to share just two quick things about my own marriage relationship. When we first got married, my wife Dania and I, when we were first married, I was still studying. My wife, she finished her bachelor's degree early, and she started teaching at a local Christian school as an elementary school teacher. We got married. We had no money. We were still living on campus. We were just getting our family life started. But I took planning for our household and our future family life very seriously. And I told her, there are a couple things that I want us to do differently than what everyone else does. Actually, now that I think it, there are three important things. One thing that other Christian couples who are in similar situations to ours, Christians that we were friends with who are in graduate school or still studying, whatever, that were getting married and starting families, we would see that they would get married, they had no money, and they would start taking advantage of every social service that they could find, and that there was actually an office in the university that helped students get connected with all these different social services, so you could string all these services together, like WIC and food stamps and all these things that we associate with poverty and welfare are used by college students, graduate students, and people like that. And I told my wife, I don't want us to do that. And it wasn't a pride issue. I told my wife, I don't want us to do it because of moral issues. We don't need financial help. We need to work, and we need to learn to be prudent in how we live. And I don't want us to make use of these social services. I want us to learn to build our household sustainably. And so even though our friends were doing this and they were explaining to us, well, you should do this and you should do this, I told my wife, no, I don't want us to do that. I want us to struggle. I want us to figure out how to do it without these artificial supports. I don't want to go into debt for school. I don't want to take advantage. I don't want to make use of social services. I want to work and I want to figure this out. And so that was one thing. Just because something is available doesn't mean that we should take it. The second thing I told my wife was, I don't want you to ever use coupons. I don't want you cutting coupons. I don't want you looking through the newspaper or the stuff that comes in the mail. I don't want you cutting coupons. What I want you to do, or what I want us to do in our family, is make a diet for our family, determine what the necessary products are for that diet, and I want you to buy that and never worry about the cost, because that's just our necessary food. I don't want us eating what's on sale. I don't want us eating what the store puts on display. I don't want the diet changing as the different deals and special offers change. I just want you to make a healthy, good diet for our family, determine what supplies are needed for that diet, and go buy it with no concern for cost or anything else, because I think that's a waste of time. That was the second thing I said. And the third thing that I said was, I want our family to have high quality products, but I only want us to have what's necessary. I don't want the Walmart culture where you get more for less and you just have more garbage. I told my wife, I want us to have good clothes, good things, but I only want us to have what's necessary. And I want to have what's necessary be high quality. I don't want us to have garbage Walmart furniture. If we need a piece of furniture, I want you to find a quality piece of furniture and have just that. I don't want us to buy anything on sale. I don't want us to pick something up because it's a good deal. I want our life to be simple, high quality, and purposeful. Because I believe that that's what makes for a beautiful life. And so I had these principles that I talked to my wife about when we first got married and were establishing our family culture. Just because something's available doesn't mean we should take it. We should purchase what we need and not concern ourselves with the cost. And we should limit purchases and possessions to what's necessary and enjoy quality products that are necessary for us. So for example, if the kids need clothes, let's figure out what clothes the kids need, what pieces for a wardrobe the kids need, And then let's buy quality clothes, quality shoes. If we have to put sheets and pillows and pillowcases and blankets on the beds, let's figure out what we need and then get quality stuff. If we need an appliance for the kitchen, let's figure out what we need and then go buy a quality appliance. And let's not do the Walmart thing where we just fill the house with junk because it's all cheap. And so I encouraged my wife to get started as she began to organize and establish our family life. And we did so. And I was right. It was the way to build a beautiful, happy household without much money, by learning to live temperately and patiently and enjoy quality without being wasteful and vain. So we had these principles of life. And when we look at the homeschool culture, what we find is the opposite. We find that most homeschool parents are not starting with a goal. They're not acting intelligently. They're not setting a goal. They're not setting the true goal and then asking, what do we need to accomplish this goal? And then being willing to put the money on the table to make that a reality. To be willing to sacrifice for that real goal. To sacrifice and know that our sacrifice is right and good. That's what motivates us. That's what gets us excited as Christians. When we know that we're pursuing the right goal, we've figured out what's necessary to get there, and now it's just a matter of making it happen. That's what makes sacrifice motivating and possible and sustainable. When we know we're fighting for a cause, and the difficulty of it is the merit of it. And most homeschool parents don't do that. Most homeschool parents start with the catalogs like coupon cutters, flipping through the ads in the Sunday paper to see what the grocery stores are going to tell them they can eat this week. And I think that's all backwards. What we should be doing is starting with a goal, then through study and research, and maybe even through prayer, we should be seeking the wisdom to know how to accomplish that goal. And then if the goal is right, and we know how to accomplish it, then we should be willing to invest in what's necessary to accomplish that goal and nothing else. To demand high quality and to temper ourselves by not buying junk. Not having our homeschool look like Walmart culture, where we're just gobbling up junk because it's on sale, or because someone was getting rid of these books and I was able to get them for a couple bucks, and I've got boxes and shelves of junk because it was cheap. That's Walmart culture. Or because this was free, I grabbed it. That's welfare culture. That's not Christian culture. We don't want homeschooling to degenerate into Walmart culture or welfare culture. We want homeschooling to be wisdom culture. We want it to look like wise people are in charge around here. So if St. Augustine was to walk into your homeschool room in the house and look around, he would actually see things that he was familiar with. Wouldn't Wouldn't that be expected? If St. Augustine walked into my house and said, "So, what are you teaching these children?" and I were to explain to him what I'm doing, he would be familiar with everything that I said, and he would raise his eyebrows and nod and say, "Very good, very good. I studied and taught the same things. You're doing a great job. You've chosen the right authors, you've got the right materials, and you're doing it the right way." Would St. Augustine say that if he came into your homeschool room and asked what you're teaching these children? If St. Augustine was put in charge of your homeschool, would he do what you're doing? Or would he need to get rid of everything you're doing in order to do what was right and good? The catalog culture is like store shopping. And this is one of those things that my wife and I have quote-unquote argued about through the years, because I hate the store culture. I work in business. I'm a business owner. I know how business works. I'm different because I'm very principled, and I would rather be poor and principled than prosperous and unprincipled. My happiness comes from the combination of these two things, both knowing that I'm providing for my family through my work, but also that I'm doing so in a way that I believe pleases God and is honest and good. If St. Augustine was to walk into your homeschool room, would he be happy? Would he just continue doing what you're doing? Or would he say, "Get all this junk out of here. This isn't right. Get all this junk out of here. I'll show you what to do." And then when he started teaching, what would he teach? What books would he use? What subjects would he teach? That's what you should be doing with your children. Not the catalog junk, not the discounted junk that happened to be available, not the stuff that was available for free. He would have a small number of books. They'd be valuable books, expensive books. They'd be relatively small, few in number, and he would know where to get started. He would know what books were necessary to begin. And if you looked into a room where St. Augustine was teaching, it would be empty. There'd be none of this junk school supply stuff. There'd be none of this nonsense, all of these distractions and all of this school supply clutter. It will be St. Augustine sitting in a chair or standing. Your children would be seated, and he would be teaching them the classical Catholic curriculum, largely from his memory, but with the help of a small number of carefully chosen books. And those books would be the essential source texts of the classical Catholic curriculum. I can name them, and we teach them in the Classical Liberal Arts Academy. And if you were to go a few hundred years later and have the Christian philosopher Boethius do the same thing, he would come in and he would have in his hand the same books that St. Augustine had. And if you were to come back in a few hundred more years and have Alcuin do the same thing, you would look at his set of books and you'd find the same books. And if Thomas Aquinas came in, you'd find the same books. If Thomas More came in, or Erasmus, you'd find the same books. And that would continue all through Catholic history as long as the real doctors and masters and saints of the church were called upon to teach your children. They would never start with the catalogs. If you asked them to teach your children, they would say, well, could you please get me some of the homeschool catalogs that are available? It would never start like that. It would start with a goal on the board, and then an explanation of how to accomplish that goal, and the process or the method for accomplishing that goal would be centuries old, and each of those teachers would write the same set of steps and would go through the same process or method to lead your children through their Catholic education. They wouldn't start with catalogs. And yet most homeschooling parents, A, don't start with a goal. B, even if they did know the goal, would not know how to pursue that goal. And C, they would start with catalogs and begin comparing what's available rather than asking what will allow us to achieve the goal. And modern homeschool parents make all three of those errors. They then overspend and waste resources they have on supplies that are available but will not help them achieve that goal. And then if they finally do learn what the goal is and how to achieve that goal, they won't have any resources left to pursue it. And this is what happens in Walmart culture. This is what happens in Walmart culture. For all the talk of saving money and getting more for less, you end up not having any money left for the most important things because you've blown it all on the junk. And that's what Walmart, being the wizards of marketing and sales that they are, tempt families to do, because it appeals to our flesh and desires. Nothing like going to Walmart and loading up a cart with cheap junk, with the kids all excited that they've got toys that'll last a few hours before they're cracked and broken. Furniture begins to tear and break, and so on. And that life, I mean, it even extends to Christmas decorations and holiday celebrations. Everything becomes Walmartized, more for less. And the same is true of homeschool. The goal of homeschooling is to give your children the education that those wise men would give your children, that St. Augustine would give if he was in charge, that Boethius would give if he was in charge, that Alcuin would give if he was in charge, that Erasmus or Thomas More or Thomas Aquinas would give if they were in charge, to give your children that education. Now, the advantage that you have in 2021 is that you can do so. The great obstacle for education throughout history has been that there was no way for children to receive that education. In medieval society, Most Christian states were governed by kings. The kings would find and take to themselves the great schoolmasters. The kings would restrict the work of the schoolmasters to their own service. The kings would appoint the schools and even establish the schools and appoint the schoolmasters, and they would serve a very specific mission in the service of the king. It wasn't even in the king's interest, at least as far as he understood, it wasn't in the king's interest to have his whole kingdom provided with a classical education, because that would lead to the problem of there being too many chiefs and not enough Indians. And what the king did, society was divided into three classes. There was the king at the top, who was not in a class at all, but by himself. And then three classes: the nobles, who were responsible to fight. They were wealthy, but they were also the soldiers and warriors who served the king with military service. Then there were the peasants, whose job it was to do the manual labor of the kingdom, just to follow the king's instructions, or the instructions of men who the king set over them. And then the third class of people were the priests, or the religious, whose job was to conduct the worship of God and lead the people in worship and holiness. These were the three groups of society. And the king was concerned that each of those classes of people did their job. And he wasn't concerned with any open market economy or any kind of general public education. He also had the freedom to find a uniquely talented individual, maybe among the peasants or among the nobles, who he could call into one of his elite schools to be taught by his chosen schoolmasters. And that's how society worked. The book of Proverbs says, "Find a man who excels in his work, and he will stand before kings." So the king would pluck out the talented people, and he would provide an education at his own expense to those considered most worthy of that education, the most gifted and talented and driven individuals. And so choosing to be educated in those cultures was not an option for people. If you were born a peasant, you were going to die a peasant. There was very little opportunity to just do whatever you want. And in our society, while much of that practically remains the same, despite all the talk about freedom and social mobility and all this stuff, most of which is just false talk. Most people will never change their state of life, no matter how much they talk. Even if they're given free public education, they'll end up exactly where they started. But the opportunity does remain for those who are committed to provide their children with an education that 500 years ago might have been available only to the children of noblemen or to young men who were willing to serve in the priesthood. Parents have the option to give that education to their children today affordably, even in the comfort of their own home. And so you can write on the whiteboard, as it were, and say, our goal in homeschooling is to give our children the education recommended by the doctors and wise men of the church. And then you would have to figure out how to do that, and the answer to that would be through the study of the classical liberal arts, which has always been the only curriculum in Catholic history, and even before Catholic history, to give your children a classical liberal arts education and to train them up in the virtues and in the Catholic faith, in the sacramental life of the church, to fulfill all of your duties as parents, which are explained in the Catechism, and to lead them into the study of classical philosophy and Catholic theology, so that no matter what field of work or study, what vocation, what occupation, what state of life they choose, they will be able to enter into that state of life and into that occupation with the knowledge of Catholic theology, of classical philosophy, of wisdom to guide them and lead them to happiness in life in general. Happiness. That's the goal that we should all have for our children. Not that they do some specific thing to please us. Not that Tommy take over the family business. Not that Mary be a nun. But simply that our children all grow to be truly happy. And we don't know, as parents, where that happiness will be found by our children, and it's none of our business because we don't have the right to tell our children what occupation or state of life to choose. That's none of our business. We're responsible to provide them with the general education, the general Christian education they need to pursue true happiness. And that again is the classical liberal arts, classical philosophy, and Catholic theology. And we can provide that to our children if we will it today. Now, the topic of this talk that I mentioned at the beginning was the relationship between the parents and a tutor. And in this case, I'm referring to myself as the tutor. I can provide your children with this education. That's not a question, that's a fact. I can provide your children with all of the resources that they need to study what the doctors of the church, what the wise men of history would recommend to them to study. I can prove that what I offer the children is what those wise men not would recommend, but did recommend. And I can help them to study and progress through it and obtain this wisdom and achieve this goal. I can, as a tutor, I can. That's not a question, that's a fact. And so if you're interested in providing your children with that education, there's a relationship that needs to exist between us that's best for all of us. And that will make it possible. And the parents have the central role to play in this, the central role. The parents have the central role to play. They're the ones who make this possible. And I'd like to explain that relationship. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches that parents have the duty, among a number of duties, parents have the duty of choosing a school for their children that teaches or that will teach their children according to their own convictions, that is, according to the parents' convictions. Parents have the right to teach their children or to have their children taught according to their convictions. In other words, children don't choose their own education. And parents shouldn't choose what happens to be available, where they live. Oh, well, here's the public school. Or here's this Catholic school, I don't really agree with what they teach. They really don't do what I like, but, hey, beggars can't be choosers. So that attitude in parents is to neglect the duties of parents. It's the duty of a parent to select a school for their children that teaches their convictions. That is, what they are convinced is true. That's the duty of parents. I just used the phrase, beggars can't be choosers. There's another phrase that says, whoever pays for the music gets to choose the song. Whoever pays for the music gets to choose the song. That's another reason why justice grants the parents the right to choose the education, and the underlying assumption is that the parents pay for the education. Because the parents pay the bills for the education, the parents, as a matter of justice, have the right to choose the content and method of that education. And parents, to maintain justice, have to put their foot down and say, no, this is my right. I have the right to provide my children with an education that teaches my convictions. I pay the tuition. I choose the teacher and the content. That's my right as a parent. That's a right that parents have to demand. And not just demand, not just fuss about it, but actually fulfill. Who cares if you have the right to choose a school? The question is, will you do so? Or will you just settle for what's available and neglect your duty, even though you have a right to it? And that's why I say that the parent is the central player in this whole situation. Because the parent can choose to be lazy and simply neglect the duty. The parent can choose to be lazy and not research, not figure out what they even believe, let alone how or where their children can be taught it. And most parents just neglect the duty and look the other way as if there's nothing else that they could have done. But they neglect their duty. Some parents just make excuses and pretend like it's too hard, but it's not too hard. Parents have to will it. They have to fulfill this duty to have their children taught according to their convictions. They have to find out teachers who are able and willing to teach according to their convictions, and then they need to make that education possible. They need to pay for the music, as it were. And that's why they get to pick the song. Some parents choose to neglect their duty because the school that could teach their children, or the teacher that could teach their children, costs more than another option. And there's only so much money in the checking account, and we've already got it committed to these other things, and there's no money left for what is actually a duty of parents. And that's a danger, as I said, of the Walmart culture, but also of the keeping up with the Joneses American culture. I've said this in another talk, that parents take money out of the children's budget category to spend it on their own unnecessary desires. There's a passage in Scripture that I think is worth mentioning here. There's a scene in the Gospels where a woman comes up to Jesus and makes a request of him. The details, I don't have them on the tip of my tongue right now, but a woman she's not a Jew, she's from outside of Israel. She comes to Jesus and makes a request of him. And it's very interesting how Jesus responds to her. He says to her that it is not right to give the children's food to the dogs. It's a very interesting response. It is not right to give the children's food or the children's bread to the dogs. In other words, he tells this woman, in my budget, as it were, the children have a right to certain resources. My children have a right to my resources. My resources are not my resources to do whatever I want with, but my children have a right to my resources because I have duty to my children. And because a parent has the duty of providing for the material and spiritual needs of his children, and the duty of educating his children according to his convictions, it is as if the children have a right to a portion of the parent's resources. And when Jesus says it is not right to give the children's bread to the dogs, he's telling this woman who is from outside of Israel that she has no right to his resources because he already owes them to his children. And in the gospel, this is spiritual, figurative talk. He's speaking to her metaphorically. And that's the actual point of the gospel event is not what I'm concerned with. I'm concerned with the principle where he says it is not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. And parents need to think of every unnecessary expense or every personal desire of theirs as a dog begging for their resources, but those resources are already owed to the children. A parent's responsibility is for his children. He's not responsible to save the hungry. He's not responsible to end world poverty. He's responsible for his own children. And only after he's fulfilled his duties to his children does he then have the option to act charitably and give to another. Because what he owes his children is owed as a matter of justice. And you can't give what is your children's away and call that charity. And many parents do this in that they've spent so much of their resources on things that are not necessary that when the children come and ask for their portion, they're told that there's nothing left for them. And this is one of the dangers of the Walmart culture, where parents buy stuff just because it's quote-unquote cheap, and also because of the competitive American culture where parents are trying to be the envy of the neighborhood. It's not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. The children need to be educated. Parents' duty to educate the children demands a certain portion of the parents' resources. And the parents need to spend those resources to carry out those duties. That's just a matter of justice. When we have children, we volunteer to take on those duties that come with those responsibilities, or with those children. So, the danger, first of all, is neglecting our duty just by laziness or by carelessness. Another danger is failing to fulfill our duty because of wastefulness, because resources that were available have been squandered on things that were not necessary. So, parents are the key player in the education of their children. It doesn't matter what kind of education the parents have received. It doesn't matter how talented or capable the parents are, because the work of education is not necessarily the parents' duty. Providing for the education is the parents' duty. Parents have the right to choose a school, and homeschooling is an option that parents can choose. But if a parent chooses to homeschool, that parent is going to have to seek out the expert assistance that's necessary to accomplish the goal. And so it all begins with the parents knowing what's to be done, having the will to do it, and then making available the resources to allow it to be done. Parents do not have to do the work themselves, and if parents are honest, they will admit that they can't do this work. So it all starts with parents. Now, the second player in this is the tutor, is the expert that the parents partner with to carry out this education. The tutor plays an important role in the family life. I want to make it very clear. There's an airplane going overhead right now. I want to make it very clear that parents screw up here because they allow education to become child-centered, and education is not child-centered. This may sound crazy, but this is what modern society has wrong. Education is like a movie in a theater or a play on a stage. If a movie is scheduled to be played in a theater. Tickets are sold. People buy the tickets. Let's say a parent buys tickets. And they go and they sit down with their children in the theater. They pay for those tickets. And the movie plays. And the parent chooses the movie that the parent believes is good for the children. Let's say we go and watch a historical film at the theater. The parents buy the tickets. They say, hey, this would be good for the children to watch. And they buy the tickets, they go sit in the theater, and the movie plays on the screen. Now, as the movie plays, the children can complain and say, I wish we could have watched something else. I wish we could have watched this. And the parents could say, I don't want you to watch that. It's not good. It's foolish. And the children cannot like it. And the children can walk out of the theater and say, well, I didn't really want to watch that movie. I wish we could have seen this movie. And the parents can say, well, I buy the tickets. I choose the movie. You should be thankful that I brought you out to the movies. You could have enjoyed that movie if you wanted to, and you could have learned things, and it would have made you wiser. The child's reaction to the movie doesn't matter. In fact, the child's reaction judges the child. The parent's duty is to present the child with what's good. The child's reaction is not the concern. The parent's duty is the concern. The same thing applies to food. Parent chooses to set a dish before the child knowing that meal is healthy. That meal is what the body needs for health and strength. And the child slams his silverware down on the table, crosses his arms and says, I hate vegetables. I hate this food. I don't want to eat this bread. I want soda. I want Cocoa Puffs. And the parent says, well, I pay for the food and I have a duty to provide you with healthy food. I don't want to give you junk food to eat, and your desire for junk food is foolish. If you choose not to eat, that's your own choice, but I've done my duty as a parent. Now, a parent can be a jerk and give food that they know everyone hates, but there's no need for that. Just about any healthy food can be made palatable. That's why we have the saying, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. And so parents take reasonable measures to make things pleasant. They don't choose a movie they know the children will hate, or they know that's boring. They choose a movie that they think will be good and is good. They choose food that they believe is healthy and pleasant to eat. A good child will eat it and say thank you. A good child will watch the film and say, thanks for taking me to the movies, Dad. And a bad child will say, I hate this movie. I hate this food. The reaction of the child is not in our control. Doing what's right is in our control. And so it's important that when we think about the relationship between the parent and the tutor, we understand that it's a partnership whereby the tutor helps the parent to fulfill his duty to his children and to God. The tutor enables the parent to fulfill his duty to the child and ultimately to God. The tutor is not a clown to perform for the child. The tutor is a partner with the parent, and his job is to present the child with everything necessary for that child's success in learning. The teacher is to make it as pleasant as possible, just like food and a film. The teacher is to make it pleasant. The teacher is to work hard. The teacher is to make every effort possible to employ all of his resources, all of his energy, all of his time to help the parent carry out their mission. So that two things are done with respect to the child. First of all, every possible support that the child needs is provided. Every possible support is provided by the parents and this tutor. And secondly, every excuse is taken away by the parent and this tutor. The child is provided with everything that he or she needs to succeed, and the child is denied any excuse if he chooses to disobey and waste the opportunity provided by the parent. The parent and the tutor partner to provide this support for the children and opportunity, and the parent and the tutor partner to remove every excuse from the student. The parent chooses the movie. The parent chooses the meal. The parent chooses the education. And the parent, in doing so, fulfills his duty to his children. The tutor offers his skill and service and sincere effort and zeal to the parent to assist and enable him to fulfill his duty. The tutor works to serve the child, to provide the child with every support possible, and to take away every excuse. And when that's done, the parent can rest in peace, knowing that he did his duty. And that's a successful education. A good child, moved by God's grace, will make good use of the opportunity. A bad child, who may either be denied God's grace or may resist God's grace, will refuse to be instructed. This is talked about constantly in the book of Proverbs. Regardless of the child's response, the parent will have fulfilled his duty. And that's what the concern should be in this partnership between a parent and a tutor. Fulfilling their duty to this child. Fulfilling their duty to God together. That's what a tutor does. A real tutor, not a fake tutor. Now, the child, as I said, needs every possible support. But what that does not mean, and this is again where many homeschool parents err, students do not need their parents, they do not need mommy or daddy to become schoolmasters. They do not need mommy or daddy to pretend that they're tutors. They do not need mommy or daddy to pretend that they're tutors. What they need is for mommy to be the best Catholic mommy she can be, and they need daddy to be the best Catholic daddy he can be. That's what they need. They need the best Catholic mommy and the best Catholic daddy. And they need a tutor to be the best Catholic tutor. In most homeschools, for the sake of education, children lose their Catholic mommy. There's no more mother in the house, in the family. Catholic men lose their wife for the sake of homeschooling. And modern homeschooling programs are designed to work like this. They're designed to be used by a woman who abandons all of the work of a mother and of a wife, not just work, but just all of the benefits that a woman offers her husband and children. She is going to throw off and become this homeschool mother that justifies everything she does by saying, hey, we homeschool. The house might be dirty, the laundry might be all over the place, the kids might look a mess. My husband and my relationship may be a mess, but we're homeschooling. You know how it is, homeschool life, ha ha ha. It's not funny. That's not right. That's not right. And parents have to resist that and not allow these booksellers to convince them that all of the negative consequences of their homeschooling programs are just necessary. That's false. That's false. And it goes back to the principle I mentioned before. It is not right to give the children's bread to the dogs. A woman does not have the right to give what she owes to her husband to homeschooling. Just as a husband doesn't have the right to give what he owes to his wife to work. A homeschooling mother doesn't have the right to give what she owes to her children as mother to homeschooling. Children need a mother. They need a father. And let me just paint this little picture for you. Imagine back in the old days when schools were strict because they had goals and they had purposes and it was considered to not be a joke. Unlike modern schools, where the teachers just label and grade kids and there's no real accountability or objective standards. In the old days, the schoolmaster was actually responsible to instill discipline into the children in the community and to make them study their lessons. And he did so with a rod in his hand. And he literally whipped the children into obedience and made them do their work. And those children knew that if they didn't respond to that correction, they could be out in a field with a hoe for the next 20 years of their lives. And so the teachers whipped those kids. And I just use the term whipped because, yes, they did literally whip them in the classroom when they couldn't be corrected with words. But the entire community was ordered around this schoolroom and the schoolmaster. And it was a method of whipping these kids into discipline and making them learn. And many of the great academic achievements of past generations was owed to the fact that the kids, when they were young, were motivated by fear to do their studies and then later enjoyed the benefits of those studies. Now those children could go to the schoolmaster and live on the edge of their seat, scared that they were going to get in trouble. But once the school day was over, every one of those kids had the opportunity to run home to mom. And mom wasn't the schoolmaster. Mom was the loving, comforting housewife who was ready with a drink, a change of clothes, a warm meal, a made bed. Mom was a source of comfort. Mom symbolizes this unconditional love of God. That love, that comforting, safe place where a kid can always run, is represented by his mother. And when homeschooling takes that mother away or turns that mother into a schoolmaster, that kid loses that safe place. And mothers cannot allow that to happen. Mothers cannot become schoolmasters and take away the loving mother from their children. And at the same time, and this is another error of homeschooling families, families cannot sign up to homeschool, or a mother cannot sign up to homeschool her children and then choose or decide that she's going to be the loving mother and the child has no schoolmaster. Because the child needs the tutor. The child needs the tutor. And the tutor has to have a certain disposition that not only instructs the student, challenges the student, but holds the student accountable. The student doesn't necessarily like the tutor, but that doesn't matter, as I said before. The tutor is there to do a job. He's accountable to real, objective results, not results in the child's response, but results with regard to the parent's goals. And the child needs that challenging outsider to push him and pull him in his studies, to hold him accountable to high standards, but somebody that's outside of mom and dad. Because if mom and dad become the schoolmaster, the child has no place to rest. And the child will want to escape from that house rather than run to it. And we see that in many homeschools. We either see the mother who chooses to homeschool and be the loving mommy, and we see those kids raised with no schoolmaster, and there are these wimpy, clueless homeschool boys that are like at home babysitting with mommy. And that's one error on one side in homeschooling. And then on the other side in homeschooling, we see the mothers who decide that they're going to be schoolmasters and their kids want to run away from home. Neither of those options can be allowed. Many homeschool programs promote them because they sell books. But homeschool parents can't allow the family to be destroyed for homeschooling, just as they can't allow the family to be destroyed for modern public schooling. Homeschooling in many cases is just as evil. It has as much of a detrimental effect on the family as any modern school would. But the parents deny this because they say, hey, we're homeschooling. It's what the catalog says to do. Apparently it works. The results are terrible as far as we can see, but hey, that's homeschooling, right? Ha ha ha. No, that's not homeschooling. So a homeschool mother needs to remain a mother, not just a mother, but also a wife. How many marriages do you see screwed up because the husband just becomes this sort of visitor to the home who goes in and out to work, pays the bills, and the wife is just operating in her own universe. I talked about this in the talk about the dangers of mommy culture, where the husband is just treated like some kind of tenant in the house. No, that can't be. The Christian marriage has to remain in place. The relationship between a husband and wife is first in a family. Without that relationship, there are no children. That relationship between a husband and wife, the marriage relationship, is a sacrament. That relationship is until death. Relationships to children are not until death. Children can up and leave as soon as they reach adulthood. The marriage relationship is first and last. And when the marriage relationship is right, then the parenting relationship between the parent and the children can be right. And when that's right, then the homeschooling relationship can be made right. But those things can't be thrown away as if homeschooling is the chief end. And yet that's normal in homeschooling circles. And as I explained in the mommy culture talk, one of the problems is that mothers like that culture. And they use homeschooling as an excuse to basically be sinful, terrible wives. If you haven't listened to the talk on mommy culture, I recommend you do that after you've listened to this one. We have to avoid these problems. We can't avoid falling off one side of the horse by falling off the other. We have to find the golden mean. And the key, once the parent has chosen to do his or her part, or his and her part. Once the parents are right, then you're going to need that a tutor is necessary to serve an important role as a go-between between the parents and the students. And the tutor has to have a certain understanding of what it means to be a tutor and what his role is in society, because a tutor has to be a strange kind of person. He has to be a person who's content to be with and working with children. He has to be simple enough to communicate and work with children. He can't be one of these fake modern scholars that's always trying to seem confusing and deep, instead of one who is able to explain things and simplify things. He has to be willing to speak in simple terms that children can understand, and yet be capable of explaining the most profound truths of philosophy and education, classical languages, mathematics, theology, and so on. And these tutors are rare because you have to know the material so well that you can articulate it in simple terms, teach it with illustrations, answer any questions that a student asks, not have to follow a teacher's manual or a scripted lesson. And there aren't many people on earth who can do that today, or who want to do that today. Tutors are very rare individuals. And they see their work as their duty to God, as their vocation in life. And they love their students for God's sake. And only a Christian can do that. So once the parents are on board, the tutor needs to be brought on board. And then the parents and the tutor need to collaborate to provide the children with every support they need for success, and to take away every excuse from the student. And by doing that, the parents can fulfill their duties to their children, which are objective. This isn't a mystery. These duties are objective. They are measurable and easy to understand. And parents can go to bed at night, lay down, put their head on their pillow, take a deep breath and know, I've done my duty. I fulfilled my duty to my children and to God. And they can rest with a peaceful heart, because these things are objective. Now, the children's response is going to be varied. And we're going to see this, and anyone who judges parents by children, unless what they're judging is the parents' failure to fulfill their duties, which is all we should ever be talking about between parents. We should look at each other with a critical spirit, because we're all obliged to fulfill our duties to our children, and we either do that or we don't. But what we should be careful not to judge each other on is how our children respond when they are given what they need by their parents, because children will respond differently. And that's really none of our business. That's between the child and God. Our children need grace to respond rightly, and we should be praying that God would give them that grace. That should be your offering at Mass. You should be praying, Lord, please give my children the grace to receive Christian instruction. After all, faith is a theological virtue. Only God can give it. And while we can do all of our work and fulfill our duties, while the work of instruction is how that instruction is given to the children, there's nothing that we can do but pray for them to receive the grace, to embrace that teaching, to make it their own, and to respond rightly to it. And we have to pray for them that God would give them that grace. And God requires us to pray as a matter of humility. We have to acknowledge that while we can do some of what our children need, we can't do everything. And in fact, the most important part of that work is not for us to do, but can only be done by God. And we have to teach and work with hope, because God's good. We have to work with hope that if we do our part, it's reasonable for us to expect that God will do His part. And remember, our goal is not to have the best 8th grader in the world or to have the best SAT score in the world. Our goal is to lead our children to become disciples of Christ, to be initiated into the church, and to be taught to do all that Christ commanded. And we want to see our children embrace the Christian faith and die in the grace of God. That's the goal. Giving our children a Christian education is one part of their lives, and we will see to it that that part is checked. If they reject it, we may have to go through a time where we have to endure the consequences of having a child reject instruction, reject the faith, leave the church possibly, fall into sin. But we have to continue our work, continue praying, continue being good examples, continue modeling the true faith, continue forgiving, continue teaching, because our goal is that our children ultimately die in the grace of God. And we may have a child who embraces the faith when he's 9 years old, like a Dominic Savio or a Maria Goretti. We may have a child who is disobedient and wild when he's young, like St. Augustine, who then converts and becomes a great saint. We may have a child who lives a life of rebellion and disobedience and is broken at the end of his life and converts on his deathbed. And in all of 3 of those cases, we'll be judged by God for whether or not we did our duty. Not for what our children did, but for what we did. And as I said, our duty is always objective and clear, and we can rest in peace knowing that we've done our duty. The worst situation to be in life is to have a child leave the faith and suffer and have to live with the regret that you as a parent did not do your duty. The scripture gives us some comfort and says in the Proverbs, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. That's comforting to the parent who fulfills his duty and trains up the child in the way he should go. This hope that when he is old, he will not depart from it. But for the parent who fails or neglects to train up the child in the way he should go, when that child is wandering through the world, that parent does not have the comfort of that proverb, does not have the hope that would have been found in that proverb had they fulfilled their duty and trained up their children in the way they should go. And that's why as a parent you have to focus on your duty, not on your child's response, but on your duty. The tutor is a necessary part of that duty. This is fundamental. And I can just explain it like this. St. Paul in the New Testament explains that God gave the Old Testament law through Moses because the law had a role to play in the life of God's people. He says the law was a tutor to lead you to Christ. The tutor and the role of the tutor is so central to human experience that St. Paul can explain that the Old Testament law fulfilled the role of a tutor and led God's people to Christ. That's what a tutor does. A tutor is not something that is just made up. A tutor is a necessary office and occupation necessary in human society. It's not the same thing as a modern school teacher. A tutor is an individual with whom parents choose to partner because he teaches their convictions with a skill and just an opportunity, because he's free, since that's his occupation, he's free to do it, that they are not able to provide. Just as a physician, a true physician, can provide a Christian with a remedy for a sickness that he's not able to provide himself with, or as a carpenter can provide a construction project and skill in building that a Christian may not be able to provide for himself. In the same way, a tutor provides an expertise that the Christian parent needs to fulfill his or her duty to his children. And this relationship, not between the parent and the child or the tutor and the child, with the child at the center, because that's wrong. That's not how the relationship works. The relationship is a relationship between the parent and the tutor. The parent and the tutor helping the parent to fulfill his or her duty to God and to the children. And that relationship is what's important to understand. That relationship modern schools have wrong. Some schools get it right. Some schools there's a clear collaboration between the parent and the children, and they work like a team. And the child feels like he's accountable to the parent and the teacher as a team. And that's right. That's how the relationship should feel. A child should not go home complaining about a teacher to his mother. That's a disaster. A parent should not be complaining about a teacher to the child. That makes no sense. If the tutor is no good, then why in the world is the child with him? That makes no sense. The parent and the tutor should be working together to fulfill the duties of the parent to the child. The parents and the tutor should be talking together all the time. Every problem should be discussed between the parents and the tutor. Every obstacle, every issue the parents notice should be discussed with the tutor, not as some kind of complaining customer, because that's not the relationship. But the discussion should be one between two partners who are trying to figure out how to solve a problem, how to overcome a problem together. And the tutor should be able to provide that help that a parent needs, or provide advice for what a parent should do. And that's the relationship that needs to be developed between a parent and a tutor. As far as my work as a tutor goes, I invite parents to take advantage of the opportunity, especially as I move out of curriculum research and restoration work and more available for tutoring. I plan to tutor for the rest of my life. This is what I've been working up to, and I have skill and experience and knowledge and resources that I don't think any other tutor possesses. And I invite parents to not see the work that I do as a website to use and to sit there playing with a website, but to see me as a living tutor that modern technology allows to help with families all around the world. Today I had 2 long phone calls with homeschool parents, and those phone conversations were great. We can dig into all kinds of issues. Parents can ask all their questions. I can share my expertise and help the parents with 20 plus years of full-time teaching experience, a homeschool father with 10 children myself. I have a lot of experience, resources, knowledge to offer. And parents, to be honest, don't make good use of it. But it's available. And so I hope that this talk makes much clearer the relationship between the parent and the tutor. I'd like to also make it clear that this is the tutor that I offer myself to be to Christian parents, to Catholic parents. And if you decide that this goal of education, which I've discussed at the beginning of this talk, is your goal, and you need a tutor who teaches your convictions, and you listen to these talks and you're like, man, this guy teaches my convictions, then I want to challenge you to partner together, and let's provide these Catholic children with the instruction and support that they need, especially in this wacky generation. Let's do it. Let's work together to provide the children with what they need, give them every support necessary, and also take away from them every excuse. Because you've got a long relationship ahead of you with these children. I don't. My relationship with these children is temporary. You have a long relationship ahead with these children. You have until they're 18, 19 years old where you're in control of their lives. And after that, they can split at any time. And these are crucial years. If you have a child at home who's a minor, these are crucial years, and you've got to make the best possible use of them. And if I can help you in that work, I'm willing and able to do so. But like I said, the parent is the key player in all of this. So I hope that's a helpful explanation of the role between a parent and a Catholic schoolmaster or tutor. I really don't believe that you're going to find another classical Catholic tutor that can offer what I can. And if you share the convictions that I express in these talks, I can guarantee you you're not going to find a tutor with the experience and resources I have to help. And I encourage you to make that decision, to go ahead and establish a partnership and work with me to give your children the best education possible by providing them with the help of a tutor, but also giving them the comfort of a mother and not causing them to lose that for the sake of homeschooling. I'm going to cut this talk off now because I'm actually being called to dinner. I hope it's helpful. I'm open to discussions. If you'd like to talk, I recommend you give me a call. My mobile phone number, this is my mobile phone number in my hand. It's 980-699-5575. I'm available all day, every day. You can call me anytime. I'm happy to talk. All I ask is that you do me the favor of sending me a text message first and just letting me know that you'd like to call. Say, hello, Mr. Michael, this is Amanda Smith. I'd like to give you a call in a few minutes. That way I can get into a quiet room or at least let you know that I'll be available and in 20 minutes, or I'm in the car and we can just make sure we're not playing phone tag. But give me a text, let me know when you'd like to talk, give me a call, and I guarantee you'll find that building a relationship by talking by phone, by just talking through the issues, asking and answering questions, a lot of these confusing issues, anxieties, and errors of homeschooling will be taken away, and you'll know that, you'll feel that quickly. So I encourage you to accept my challenge, not try to do it yourself, but establish the goal, ask how the goal can be established, recognize and acknowledge that you need help to accomplish the goal, and then work on parents to simply make that help available to your children. And then rest, knowing that your duties can be fulfilled. So I hope that's helpful. God bless your families.